Before start story, tell me where and what time you are watching. The last train to nowhere. The night was colder than any Eleanor had ever known. It wasn't just the temperature, it was a bone deep chill, as though the world itself had turned its back on her. Standing on the desolate platform of a forgotten train station, she tightened her scarf and glanced at her watch. The time read 11:47 p.m., though it felt as if time had stopped entirely. The station was called Hollow Junction, a name that suited it perfectly. It was tucked away in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, with no signs of life beyond the flickering yellow lights overhead. She had found the station purely by accident, or so she thought. Her car had broken down on a remote stretch of road evening and wad evening, and walking in search of help, she stumbled across a rusted sign pointing to the station. There was no schedule posted, no indication of where the trains went or if they even came at all. But as the hours crept by, Eleanor felt an odd pull, a sense that she was meant to be here. That's when she heard it, the distant rumble of an approaching train. At first she thought she was imagining it. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the low, mournful wail of a train horn. The track shivered and a black locomotive emerged from the darkness, its headlights cutting through the thick fog. It was an old steam engine, the kind you only see in museums. The train screeched to a halt, and the door of the first car creaked open. No conductor stepped out, no announcements were made. The door simply waited, an unspoken invitation. Eleanor hesitated. Something about this felt wrong, unnatural, but the biting wind and the eerie silence of the station were worse. She took a deep breath, stepped onto the train, and the door hissed shut behind her. Inside, the train was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with cracked wood paneling, and the seats were covered in faded red upholstery. At first glance, the car seemed empty, but as Eleanor moved forward, she noticed figures seated here and there. They were unnervingly still, their faces obscured by shadows or tilted downward. She chose a seat near the middle of the car and sat down, her fingers trembling. The train jerked forward, and through the window the station disappeared into the night. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on the track was hypnotic, but Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. First time on the train? A voice asked. Eleanor turned sharply. A man was seated across the aisle, leaning forward with a faint smile. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his hair neatly combed, but his skin was unnaturally pale. Yes, she replied cautiously. Do you know where it's going? The man's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. It goes where it needs to. You might say it's a journey of sorts. Eleanor frowned. That doesn't make any sense. There wasn't even a schedule at the station. There's no need for one, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The train only comes for those it's meant to find. Her chest tightened. What do you mean by that? Before he could answer, the lights flickered, and the train plunged into darkness. Eleanor's heart raced as she gripped the edge of her seat. When the lights returned, the man was gone. In his place was a scrap of paper, folded neatly on the seat. She picked it up with trembling hands. Written in elegant script were the words, Beware the conductor. The train lurched and Eleanor's gaze darted to the other passengers. They were still eerily motionless, but something about them had changed. Their outlines seemed blurry as if they were fading. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her throat felt constricted, as though an invisible hand was wrapped around it. The train's horn blared, and the car filled with a thick, choking fog. Eleanor coughed, her eyes watering as she stumbled to her feet. She needed to get out to find help, but when she reached the door at the end of the car, it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through her as she banged on the door, but it was no use. Looking for something? A deep voice rumbled behind her. She turned to see a tall figure in a dark uniform. His face was obscured by shadows, but his eyes gleamed like burning coals. He carried a lantern that cast an eerie glow, and his presence filled the car with an oppressive weight. Who are you? Eleanor demanded, her voice shaking. I'm the conductor, he said with a smile that revealed sharp, yellowed teeth, and you, my dear, are quite out of place. Eleanor backed away, her heart pounding. I didn't mean to get on this train. My car broke down, and I was just looking for help. The conductor's smile widened. Oh, but the train doesn't make mistakes. You're here for a reason. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, he said, his voice like gravel. Soon enough. He turned and walked away, his lantern swinging. The fog followed him, leaving Eleanor gasping for air. She collapsed into a seat, her mind racing. What was this place? Why was she here? As the hours dragged on, the train passed through strange landscapes. One moment they were hurtling through a dense forest where the trees seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. The next they were crossing a barren wasteland under a blood-red sky. Time lost all meaning and Eleanor felt herself slipping into despair. Then she saw her. A little girl sat a few rows ahead, her dark hair framing a pale face. She was clutching a battered teddy bear and staring out the window. Unlike the other passengers, she seemed real alive. Eleanor approached cautiously. Hi, she said softly. What's your name? The girl turned, her wide eyes filled with fear. Lucy, she whispered. Lucy, do you know where this train is going? The girl shook her head. But we can't let him find us. Who? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. The conductor, Lucy said, her voice trembling. He takes people away, forever. Eleanor's blood ran cold. How do we stop him? Lucy glanced around nervously. There's a way, but it's dangerous. Tell me, Eleanor urged, please. The girl hesitated before leaning closer. There's a lever in the engine room. If you pull it, the train will stop. But he'll try to stop you. Eleanor's resolve hardened. She couldn't stay on this cursed train, waiting for whatever fate the conductor had planned. She thanked Lucy and made her way toward the front of the train, her heart pounding with every step. The other passengers seemed to watch her as she passed, their empty eyes following her every move. She avoided their gaze, focusing on the task ahead. When she reached the door to the engine room, she hesitated. The air was thick with heat and the scent of burning coal. Summoning her courage, she pushed the door open. The engine room was a hellish sight. Flames roared in the furnace, casting shadows that danced like demons. The lever Lucy had mentioned stood on the far side, but between her and it was the conductor. I warned you, he growled, his voice echoing like thunder. This train has a purpose, and you will not interfere. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. I'm not staying here. I don't care what you or this train wants. The conductor laughed, a deep, guttural sound. You think you have a choice. You boarded this train because you were lost. And now you'll never leave. He lunged at her, but Eleanor dodged, her adrenaline surging. She grabbed a loose piece of metal from the floor and swung it at him. The conductor staggered back, his lantern shattering and plunging the room into darkness. Guided only by the glow of the furnace, Eleanor raced toward the lever. She could hear the conductor's heavy footsteps behind her, feel the heat of his anger. Just as she reached the lever, his hand closed around her wrist. No, he roared. With a scream, Eleanor used all her strength to pull the lever. The train screeched violently, the wheels grinding against the track. The conductor let out a blood-curdling scream as the train began to slow. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground beside the tracks. The train was gone, and the night was eerily silent. She sat up, her body aching, and looked around. In the distance, she saw the faint glow of a town safety. As she walked toward it, she glanced back one last time. The tracks stretched into the darkness, endless and empty. But she knew she'd never forget the train, or the horror she'd faced aboard it. She was free. But at what cost? Far away in the endless void where the train now lingered, the conductor smiled. The train always found its passengers, and one day it would find her again.